Hi, I'm Marianne Lahan, the voice of John, and I'm here today to announce the release of the first video podcast of 2024. You know, 2023 held such special moments for my ministry, for the voice of John, and high among them was the opportunity to bring the voice of John to Morgantown, West Virginia. As many of you know, John was aborted and died of infanticide at the University of West Virginia Medical Center. What an opportunity, 47 years later, for the voice of John to be heard at West Virginia's State Right to Life Committee conference. What an opportunity. And wonderfully, I had the opportunity, the great privilege of sharing the stage with Dr. Wanda Franz. Dr. Franz was president of National Right to Life Committee for 20 years. She is an icon in the pro-life movement. And to be able to share a stage with her and for our messages to weave together in such a magnificent way, for her husband, Dr. Gunther Franz, taught physiology at the University of West Virginia Medical Center back in the late 70s. And he was disciplined for having compared the Holocaust in the uterus through abortion to the Holocaust in his native country of Germany. He was an immigrant to the United States and saw clearly the comparison between abortion and the Holocaust. This beautifully told story, beautifully woven together, produced by Sam Lesant Jr. It's really the legacy and the life of a baby named John.
Roe v. Wade came down in 1973. What the situation was here in West Virginia, there was immediately agitation about whether or not the WVU Medical Center would begin to offer abortions. The three members of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology announced that they would not be performing abortions because they believed the entity in the womb was a human being and their second patient, and they didn't believe in killing a patient. And so that, of course, created a lot of anger among the pro-abortion activists, and they brought in money from out of state in order to sue the university. And the judge ruled in favor of them because the university is a public facility and it was supposed to be offering any service that was not against the law. And the three members of the OBGYN department said, okay, we're going to quit because we're not going to do abortions. And all three of them went into private practice and took their patients with them, including me, because I was one of the patients. I was pregnant, by the way, at that time. The university then hired additional faculty members who would perform abortions. In other words, they went out and hired abortionists for WVU Medical Center. So I'm happy to introduce Marianne Lahan to you. She has a very important story to tell you about her experience there.
It wasn't until 1977 when I was living in Morgantown, West Virginia, and working at a university teaching hospital. And I had initially done 1 year in oncology. And while it was a wonderful experience, people were dying every day. So after a year, I decided it was time to make a change, and I would do obstetrical nursing. And I would see life in the beginning and new life coming into the world. It was on my orientation, my first days at the teaching hospital, and I was given a little clipboard with the list, make sure you do this, this, and this. And so I was following the clipboard, and I'd go in and make sure everything was set up for surgery, go into another room, make sure everything was set up for a delivery. And then I went into what was called the dirty utility room to make sure it had been cleaned up from the shift before. And I heard a sound that's imprinted into my heart. And it was just like a little purring sound. And I turned the light on, and there on this dirty utility counter was a child laying there. And I went out to get help, and there were doctors and nurses. They were sitting around the nurse's station having coffee. And I told them that I found a baby laying on the dirty utility counter. And the doctor said, "It's an abortion. Just let it go. It's an abortion." And at that time, I could only think of a miscarriage. And I thought maybe I imagined that it moved or that I heard something. And I went back and I looked, and then realizing that nobody would help me, I picked up the baby and I said, "I baptize you, John, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." And I gave that child back to the Lord. Before he died, I had the opportunity to hold him, and I told him that I would let everybody know what he went through, what I saw that day in the dirty utility room.
That was 46 years ago, 1977. And in that dirty utility room, the Holy Spirit of God came upon John and me. He came upon us. And that day, a child died and a ministry was born. And I'm so grateful to Dr. Franz for bringing me back, to Marianne. Thank you for listening to the voice of John. And I also want to thank Patty Graham, I went to her that morning after everything happened. I was so distraught and confused. I went in to work that day, a young nurse, full of idealism. I had taken my oath as a nurse, and I witnessed the death of a child through abortion and infanticide. He was left to die. Don't touch it. It's an abortion. So I went forth from that day, and as Wanda and I are talking about, like, what happens to medical people? What happened to me? I would live the next year of my life. And you know who I was angry at? And I admit to this. I was angry at God. Like, why? God, why did you let me see that child and touch him? Why did you let me hold him and love him? It was like he became the child of my soul. And so I went through a year where I would wake up at night. I was undiagnosed PTSD. I would wake up at night, and I would sometimes wake up to the sound, just a little purring sound, and I heard the cry. Sometimes I would wake up and I'd have to look at my finger because John held my finger. And I would think, he's here, he's with me. And he was. John was in my soul. And so after a year of why God, I asked that same question, that very same question to my very same God. I said, with an open heart, this time not that angry, confused heart, God, why did you let me see him? Why did you let me find John? And once again, the Holy Spirit becomes a part of me. And so our mission began together, John and I. And I thought of those words that I spoke to him. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. And wasn't that not just the mom or the dad, but us as a society that had turned our backs on the child in the womb? That was the first words I spoke to John during that night. He lived for several hours after his baptism, after I had swaddled him in that blanket. Just a little bit of comfort in his dying. I gave him his name, and I really didn't. It was the Holy Spirit, and it would be decades later before I realized why his name was John. It was just like I knew him. And before I left him, he had become a part of who I am. So 1 year of PTSD. And you know, I had heard about lobbying, and I was never really, Karen, I could relate to you, not the politics, I'll do something. But I remember going to our state senator's offices, Rick Santorum, Bob Casey, and listening to other people give testimony, other nurses and doctors give their testimony. And it was just amazing to hear, you know, this hospital, we just put the placenta over the baby's face immediately. Oh, so they suffocate them there, or we put them in the basin. That basin of water that I described as having found on that dirty utility room table, I used that very water that was used in the killing procedure to pour it over his head and to say, I baptize you, John. No, that was the water that they would drop the botched abortion. That's what John was called, a botched abortion, because he came out alive. But I realized then that more and more children are victims of infanticide. So John's voice through this ministry, he is the voice of the 65 million children. He is the voice of infanticide. And you know, I went out and I started speaking. I'm going the wrong way Corrigan. You know, my mother was a Corrigan. I inherited that gene. But I went out and I started speaking on behalf of John, on behalf of abortion, and on behalf of children of infanticide. And one day I was speaking at a Catholic church in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And you know, as I was speaking, and I always talk about Down syndrome, because some countries are actually eradicating Down syndrome. Our own statistics in the United States, how many Down syndrome children are destroyed, killed by abortion. And so I would always advocate for them. And after the Mass was over, the altar server came up to me, and with his beautiful smile and innocence, he said, "Thank you for standing for my side." And I looked at him, and he had all the features of Down syndrome. But I was so startled, I just said, oh, you're so welcome. But I went home that week, and it was kind of playing on my mind, like, he deserved more than you're welcome. Like, thank you for, for honoring John's voice that way. And I went back the following week and I said, you are such a light when you walk up that aisle and hold the cross up and you've carried your cross. And I I really appreciated that you came up. I said, what is your name? He said, my name is John. And the Holy Spirit went, John is on my board of directors for the Voice of John. He speaks beautifully on the Voice of John website, and I encourage all of you to visit John and me. But he speaks beautifully in a way that I couldn't speak, or anybody, about what it's like to walk through life with Down syndrome. So he has been a blessing to my ministry. But then it was years later, and my beautiful niece was carrying a pregnancy, her 9th baby, and she went to the doctor's appointment, and she was a little bit older, obviously, when you get to number 9, but she was carrying her child, and the doctor, they had done the genetic studies and came back and told her that she was carrying a child incompatible with life. And I guess that's quite the buzzword these days, if there's a genetic anomaly. But when the doctor said, you're carrying a child incompatible with life, Elizabeth's baby kicked in her womb. And obviously, her little boy didn't agree with that. Betsy at first prayed, dear God, let them be wrong. If this can't be right, I'll pray for the miracle. But the ultrasounds came back and confirming in the inevitable. She was carrying a child with trisomy 18. This is not Down syndrome. And it generally, for a little boy in particular, says incompatible with life. But what my niece did is every kick, every tumble that she felt, she loved her baby. And she prayed, her prayer changed from, God, let me have the miracle, to God, let him be born alive, that I could just say to my son, I love you, John. Her baby's name is John Paul Raphael. And that's my niece, Elizabeth, with the baby, and that's her husband, Dr. Ralph Leon. What happened was when the baby was born, the delivery room became the hospice unit. And John Paul Raphael got to meet his brothers and sisters, his grandma, his grandpa. And for 26 precious hours, my niece was able to love him and hold him and feel love. She has since written a book. It's called Let Yourself Be Loved. And don't deprive yourself of whatever time God gives to you. Say thank you. And her son, he had the most beautiful funeral with his brothers and sisters and cousins there. And you know, right at that time, I read an article. It was a Facebook page. I'm technically terrible, right? You know, you saw the start here. But it was an article from a woman who had been given that same diagnosis, you're carrying a child incompatible with life. She scheduled her abortion, her late-term abortion. And she talked about that last night and drawing a bath and getting in the tub and feeling her baby's moves for the last time, because she was going to do what was best for her child. And if you look at my niece with the baby and that precious time to hold and love her child, that was given to her by God. And one time somebody said to Betsy, if you could turn back time, Betsy, and she said, oh, if I could, I wouldn't go to a time when I didn't have a baby named John Paul Raphael. I would just go back to that day, that magnificent day with my baby. So we need to be support, and I'm so grateful to see all our pregnancy resource people here at your tables, and God bless you, and your work is challenging, but thank you so much for being here. You know, years later, and Karen, I so appreciate your message at so many levels. My dad and mom, they needed me, and my mom was fortunate enough to die at the age of 86, I think, in the home that she had lived in from when she was not even 2 years old, where my daughter lives now. But my dad then was alone. And at 96, we felt he shouldn't be there alone, so I took my dad to live with me. Now, I came from kind of a strict Irish Catholic background, and one of 7 kids. And if you were going up the steps, you know, my father would look up and say, "Did you ask your mother if there was laundry or anything to be taken upstairs?" We'd grab a statue off the table just to have something in our hands to go up the steps so he wouldn't stop us. But that's the way I was raised. So when my dad was living with me at 96, I gave him little exercises. "Daddy, stretch your arms," you know. And the one day he stretched his arms, it was January 14th. And when he did, I said, "Daddy, we don't do just one thing at a time in our family, do we?" And he said, "Honey, how old did you tell me I am?" "Well, Daddy, you're 96. He said, "Well, what could I do?" I said, "When you raise your hands, you ask God, what can I do?" That was January 14th. That was one of the very few years I didn't go to the March for Life in Washington, D.C., because I stayed back to take care of my dad. And we produced that day, I called the filmmakers who produced the documentary that I produced entitled The Voice of John, about this little boy from Morgantown, West Virginia. But I called him, I said, "Chris, could you bring your cameras down and everything? I'd like to do a blog." Of course, even then, my technical incompetence. He said, "Do you know what a blog is?" I said, "Well, not really, but I've heard you use that word." So Chris came down and he did a blog, and it was a beautiful blog created on January 21st with my dad and I, and he sang together. We sang Amazing Grace. It concluded with my dad saying, "I love you, honey. I love you, Daddy." And that night, we reviewed that little clip, and as I'm looking at it, I said, "Daddy," I said, "remember last week you said, 'What does God want me to do?'" And he said, "Well, not really, honey." And I said, "Well, anyway, I figured it out." I said, "Just as that little baby named John, he represents life at the dawn of life, the beginning of life. You, Daddy, you can be a part of the Voice of John." And he said, "Well, honey, I thought you were done with it." I did too. But I said, the Holy Spirit just went like this. "So, Daddy, will you be a part of the Voice of John and represent life at the dusk, the end of life issues?" And he said, "Well, honey, that'd be swell." God took my dad home the following week. And, you know, I just thought of those words, "Welcome home, John, my good and faithful servant." And my dad had completed his task in becoming a part of the Voice of John. This is one of my favorite pictures, and I had to put it in here. That's my dad's hand. On the right is my daughter, Erin, and my hand is above my dad's, and that's his great-granddaughter, my granddaughter, Eden, the baby hand. I love hands. I love that even as a young nurse. The ministry went on, though, after that. My dad's name, by the way, is John, in case anybody was wondering. But the ministry went on afterwards to speak to post-abortive. And, you know, again, reflecting on those words that I spoke to John, looking at him, "Father, forgive us. We know not what we do." And I remember looking at that beautiful child, so beautifully formed, and saying, "John, if your mommy knew you, if she could see you like I do, she would not have done this to you." And so that was the Holy Spirit saying, "You need to be there to minister to the man or woman who grieves abortion. And Karen, thank you for sharing that in your presentation. And I'm going to just tell you one quick story, and this is so funny, but men grieve abortion. They truly, truly do. And one year, it was the worst year going to the March for Life in DC, the absolute worst in all my years. And the bus was only half filled, and I had to make a call. I said, we need to keep moving. We need to move along here, whoever's on, because time was precious. And we went to DC anyway, but as we're driving down the highway, I hear a horn beeping, and I was like, oh, that waving, I thought it was a supporter. And my vice president comes up to me and he said, Mayor, I think that's one of the people not on the bus. And I said, oh, okay. So we pulled over at the next exit. He left his car, got on the bus. I was busy on the front of the bus telling everybody about, bus etiquette and so forth. And my vice president comes up and he said, I think we have a situation on the back of the bus. And I said, well, you could take care of it. And he said, no, this is one for you. And I went back and I said to the man, I said, is there a problem? And he said, no. He said, there's no problem. He said, I just never went to Atlantic City this way. And I said, oh, no, this isn't the bus to Atlantic City. We're going. Bob decided to stay with us on the bus trip, even though he never even heard of the March for Life. But he said, well, I haven't seen DC in years and years. He kept us amused. He was quite a character. On the way home, though, we found out that when he got on the bus, he just looked so sad, so exhausted. But we all looked pretty pathetic. You know how you look getting on that bus after that March for Life. But I asked if anybody was particularly touched or if they'd like to give their testimony. And Bob got up in front of the bus and he talked about how when he was in high school, he had gotten his sweetheart pregnant and he stood by her. He paid for the abortion. He took her for the abortion. And he said, I didn't know until today what I had done. And so the wounds of abortion, sometimes they come out while they're on the table experiencing abortion. It could be decades later, but you carry a wound. And women after abortion, they suffer. So the ministry of John, I don't think that clock is right, that I'm only halfway through. But the ministry of John, and I look at the Hippocratic Oath, a beautiful oath that a physician takes on becoming a doctor. I will do no harm. I will not administer an abortifacient, a poison. And the Hippocratic Oath has been revised. The Hippocratic Oath has been revised to allow for abortion and euthanasia. And it's, the 10 Commandments haven't been revised that I know of, and we cannot revise our morality for any reason. And I love this Norman Rockwell picture of what medicine used to be and now how we suffer. We as doctors, nurses, anybody involved in the abortion industry in any way is profoundly affected. If you are there, and I look at this dark deeds, and one of the things that I shared with my friend Patty Graham the day I told her about John was I thought about taking him to Magee Women's Hospital. Maybe they would save him. It's right across the border. I don't think Pennsylvania would do this. Well, I don't know if any of you heard about the dark deeds in Pittsburgh. The Magee Hospital has a relationship with Planned Parenthood. Babies, late-term aborted babies, the size of John, are put in refrigeration. They're taken to the University of Pittsburgh. The kidney was removed, thymus. They were scalped. Their scalps placed on the back of rodents. what we are doing in infanticide and with the remains of these beautiful children. I'm so grateful I didn't get John to McGee Hospital. And we had a beautiful presentation on the abortion pill. All I can say is just be so careful. It's so sad when I read the stories of kids who are trying to hide their pregnancy, get their hands on this abortion pill, self-administer, and they're giving birth in showers. They're sometimes giving birth and seeing a little wriggle or sign of life. They called a pharmacist. What do I do with this? Just flush. Our sewage system should not be a burial ground. When healthcare looks like this, is this women's healthcare? This is not what women's healthcare should look like. And when your biohazardous waste looks like this, you know you have wounded the hearts of the medical profession. You are destroying the soul of our medical practices. And I love this quote by Dr. Anthony Levatino. I have been honored to meet him. He said, "I want the general public to know that the doctors know this is a person. This is a baby. This is not some type of blob of tissue." Doctor did many abortions before becoming a pro-life physician. And I also have a quote that I want to share by Dr. Bernie Nathanson. And Dr. Nathanson was responsible for NARAL, the abortion laws. He was responsible for it. He ran one of the largest abortion clinics in the country, and even his own child. But he said, "There is no longer serious doubt in my mind that human life exists from the very onset of pregnancy." So his journey from abortionist to pro-life outspoken advocate has been amazing. And I just want to say that every life, whether it's that little ectopic pregnancy, I don't care how little you are, how sorry, John. Every life, every human life made in the image and likeness of God. You are all being called today. It was Elie Wiesel that said, "I firmly and profoundly believe that anyone who has listened to a witness becomes a witness." You are all, from a first witness to John's life, Patty Graham sitting here, came from Ohio today to hear this. Every one of you today had become a witness to John's life and his message and his ministry. You are created in his image. From the womb to the tomb, from the dawn to the dusk. I will respect your life as a nurse, as a medical practitioner, and as the voice of John.
In West Virginia, when we were doing the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, that we used that clip that you just saw as part of our lobbying effort to let people know that, in fact, there have been many such late-term abortions in West Virginia. And I just want to follow up quickly. The pro-abortion medical student that I referenced earlier, who had reported my husband to the dean, she had been a nurse for a number of years before deciding she wanted to become a doctor, and she had 3 children of her own. So she obviously had plenty of experience that should have told her what abortions were about. But my husband had always attended the end of the year picnics held for the graduating students, and one year he was really late getting home. And he said, well, he had spent a long time talking to a student, which turned out to have been this student, about her experience in the 4th year rounds of the different departments of medicine. And while serving on the OBGYN floor a late-term abortion was scheduled, and she persuaded some of her fellow students to come with her to see the, quote, products of conception. It had something to do with her wanting to get her fellow students to face up to the reality of abortion so they'd be ready to do it when the time came. And she walked into the surgery where the abortion had occurred, went to the side table where the products of conception were lying, and they had been wrapped in a blanket that had been obtained from the neonatal unit. She picked up this small little package and opened it and saw this very small, fully formed baby, and she gasped in horror. And she said, "It's a person." And I think that in that moment, she was suddenly converted and suddenly saw what, of course, Marianne has been talking about, that these are children made in the image of God. And I think it was the neonatal blanket that made the difference in looking at that baby, because I think she remembered her experiences of her own in the neonatal units before with 3 children. But she was devastated, and she was so upset about everything that she had done and everything she had said. And she asked my husband if, she could do anything for him, and he said no. She was there to apologize. He said, "You go and tell your pro-life student friends and the people that you've influenced, you tell them what it's really about." And so that became her mission. And I did want to mention that just last week I got an Alan Guttmacher notice. My husband always got the Alan Guttmacher information. Of course, they're an arm of Planned Parenthood. And I want to see this, well, we both wanted to see the statistics that they put together. But they had a congratulatory letter that said that the Guttmacher Institute was thrilled to announce the election of its president and CEO, Dr. Hermione Palacio, to the prestigious National Academy of Medicine. This election is a testament to Dr. Palacio's outstanding professional accomplishments and unwavering commitment to health and medicine. Head of Planned Parenthood. And the head of the organization that gave the honor said, "It's my honor to welcome this truly exceptional class of new members. Their contributions to health and medicine are unparalleled. Their leadership and expertise will be essential to helping this organization tackle today's urgent health challenges." So what we have is pro-abortion people who are talking about functioning as medical people, and they are part of, in this case, the National Academy of Medicine. So I'm just telling you all this because I think it's really important for us today to be very conscious of the damage that's been done to the medical institutions and our need to begin rehabilitation and to helping them to come to an understanding that every life is sacred and a gift from God. Thank you very much.